So we are starting with the topic of pharynx, including tonsils. Here you are seeing a sagittal section of the head and neck, the nasal cavity, the oral cavity, and the larynx. The part of the viscera which is lying behind the nasal cavity is called as nasopharynx. So this region of the pharynx is called nasopharynx. The part of the pharynx behind the oral cavity with this and this line is called as oropharynx, and part of the pharynx that is below the oropharynx all the way up to the commencement of esophagus, this is called as laryngopharynx. Pharynx is divided into three parts: the nasopharynx opposite nasal cavity, the oropharynx opposite the oral cavity, laryngopharynx behind the larynx. The laryngopharynx is divided into two parts. The part between the inlet of the larynx, behind the inlet of the larynx, is called as epilarynx. The part below the inlet of the larynx, up to the commencement of esophagus, is called as hypopharynx. So nasopharynx, oropharynx, laryngopharynx. Laryngopharynx divided into an epilarynx and a hypopharynx. The commencement of the nasal cavity is called as anterior nares. The end of the nasal cavity which communicates with the oral cavity is called as posterior nares. But if you want to sound more learned, you don't use the word posterior nares, you use the word choana, Choana. Choana is a communication of the nasal cavity with nasopharynx. The oral cavity and oropharynx, the junction between the two is called as oropharyngeal isthmus. The oral cavity and oropharynx is formed by the oropharyngeal isthmus. The junction between nasopharynx and oropharynx is called as nasopharyngeal isthmus, or also just called as the pharyngeal isthmus. So, choana communicating nasal cavity to oral nasopharynx, oropharyngeal isthmus communicating oral cavity with oropharynx, and nasopharynx to oropharynx is by the nasopharyngeal isthmus or just the pharyngeal isthmus. The pharynx is a musculofacial half cylinder that links the oral and nasal cavities in the head to the larynx and esophagus in the neck. So it's a cylindrical structure, but the anterior portion is open. That's why it's a half cylinder. The soft palate in between the nasopharynx and oropharynx acts as a flutter valve. So when you are coughing, the soft palate is raised so that all the flow of the cough comes out through the oral cavity. When you are breathing deep through the nose, the soft palate will be lowered so that more air can pass down into the larynx. When you are sneezing, the power is so much that the soft palate is lying in between, so that some amount of air will blow out through the nose and some others will blow out to the oral cavity, so that it passes harmlessly to the oral cavity. But the power to the nose will be sufficient enough to blow out any particles. Now imagine if during sneeze, if the oropharyngeal isthmus is closed by the soft palate, the entire air will come out to the nose, and you will find that in your hand There will be some concha in your hand because the blow will be so powerful that it will blow out even the bone. So you don't want such a thing to happen. The flutter valve acts such that enough air passes through the nasal cavity to clear the nasal passage, but some large amount of air passes out to the oral cavity, so that it does not harm the nasal cavity. Musculofacial. The muscles of the pharynx are classified as two: circular muscle and longitudinal muscle. Here there is a difference. GI tract has got inner circular, outer longitudinal. Here, the longitudinal muscles, even if it starts from outside the pharynx, immediately comes into the pharynx and lie on the inner side. The circular muscle lies on the outside. The circular muscles are also called as constrictor muscles. So there are three constrictors: superior constrictor, middle constrictor, and inferior constrictor. They reduce the diameter of the pharynx. And there are longitudinal muscles which run and get attached to the thyroid cartilage of the larynx. They help in elevating the larynx during swallowing. The three constrictors have got attachment to the base skull. That's a superior constrictor. So there are two pterygoid plates in relation to the base skull. The lateral pterygoid plate is for the attachment of the pterygoid muscles, which are muscles of mastication. So outer side of the lateral pterygoid is lateral pterygoid plate is the lateral pterygoid muscle, and medial surface of the lateral pterygoid plate is medial pterygoid muscle. But the medial pterygoid is for the attachment of superior constrictor. Not only does it attach to the medial pterygoid plate, pterygoid hamulus, and then from the pterygoid hamulus to the mandible is the pterygomandibular raphe, and also gets attached to the side of the tongue. So superior constrictor has got four attachments: medial pterygoid plate, pterygomandibular raphe, the mandible, and the sides of the tongue. So basically, superior constrictor is opposite the nasopharynx and oropharynx. The middle constrictor has got attachment to the stylohyoid ligament, lesser or the smaller cornu of hyoid bone, and the greater cornu of hyoid. So it has got the attachment of styloid ligament and lesser cornu of hyoid and the greater cornu of hyoid. And the inferior constrictor has got attachment to the oblique line of thyroid and cricoid. So inferior constrictor is conveniently subdivided into a thinner thyropharyngeus muscle and the thicker cricopharyngeus muscle. The cricopharyngeus muscle, the thicker cricopharyngeus acts as a constrictor, acts as a what do we say? It prevents. It is the narrowest part of the pharynx. It acts as a sphincter, cricopharyngeus. And then, of course, below the cricopharyngeus starts the esophagus. This is lying behind the throat. So I'll repeat again. The superior constrictor has got base skull and mandible and tongue. The middle constrictor has got attachment to thyroids, and the inferior constrictor has got attachment to thyroid and cricoid. Thyropharyngeus and the cricopharyngeal sphincter. So here you are seeing the attachment, anterior attachment of the superior constrictor, the attachment of the middle constrictor, and the attachment of the inferior constrictor. If you notice from behind, the constrictors of each side are attached to a raphe in between. This is called as pharyngeal raphe. It goes and get attached to the base skull. Also, you will notice that the lower part of superior constrictor is overlapped by the upper part of middle constrictor. And the lower part of middle constrictor is overlapped by the upper part of inferior constrictor. So the three constrictor muscles can be thought of as like three flower pots placed one within the other. So the lower part of the upper pot is covered by the upper part of the lower pot. So that is the case in how the constrictors are arranged. Between base skull and the superior constrictor, there is a space which is filled by what is called here as pharyngeal fascia. Actually, its correct name is pharyngobasilar fascia. The pharyngobasilar fascia is a tough fascia which splits at the upper end of the superior constrictor to continue outside the pharynx as a thin, loose connective tissue buccopharyngeal fascia. The pharyngobasilar fascia continues on the inner surface of the pharynx. This gap is filled by pharyngobasilar fascia. Here you are seeing a much larger gap. Anterior portion of this gap is plugged by the tensor and levator palatini muscle of the soft pharynx. The posterior part is reinforced by the pharyngobasilar. The longitudinal muscle of the pharynx, one of them starts from the styloid process that is called as stylohyoid, stylopharyngeus. One starts from the styloid process, goes to the pharynx, is stylopharyngeus muscle. The other two muscles are inside the pharynx. We'll see them a little while later. What you'll also notice here is that at the level of nasopharyngeal isthmus, there is a palatopharyngeal sphincter which prevents food that you are eating from entering the nasopharynx, or vomiting will not pass through the nasopharynx. So there is a sphincter, palatopharyngeal sphincter, which is located at the junction of nasopharynx and oropharynx. The reason why the one which is attached to the pterygomandibular raphe, it's called raphe because there is a superior constrictor arising and going posteriorly, and there is a buccal muscle coming anterior. Where two muscles interdigitate, it is not a ligament, it is a raphe. So here you are seeing superior constrictor, here you are seeing the tensor palati and levator palati plugging the gap on the anterior part, and on the posterior part there is a opening. This is called as pharyngeal fascia, correctly called as pharyngobasilar fascia. Stylopharyngeus arising from the styloid apparatus enters the pharynx through the gap between the superior constrictor and middle constrictor. Then it goes and gets attached to the thyroid cartilage. So stylopharyngeus helps in elevating the thyroid cartilage when the larynx gets elevated during deglutition. The gap between the superior constrictor and base skull is for two structures passing through this gap. One is the eustachian tube, which opens into the nasopharynx, and next to the eustachian tube is the ascending palatine branch of facial artery. So two structures pass through the gap between base skull and superior constrictor, eustachian tube and ascending palatine artery. there is a large gap between the superior constrictor and middle constrictor. This large gap is called as oropharyngeal triangle. Numerous structures pass through this oropharyngeal triangle. There is a gap between middle constrictor and inferior constrictor, which is filled by thyroid membrane. Now, this thyroid membrane is for the passage of internal laryngeal nerve and superior laryngeal vessels. Superior laryngeal vessels are branches of superior thyroid vessels. So, internal laryngeal nerve and superior thyroid vessels pierce the thyroid membrane. This is a gap between the middle and inferior constrictor, and the gap below the inferior constrictor is for the recurrent laryngeal nerves and vessels. So recurrent laryngeal nerves and vessels pass from there. So I'll repeat again. 3 constrictors, 4 gaps. Gap between superior constrictor base skull for the passage of eustachian tube and ascending pulmonary artery. The gap between middle and inferior constrictor is for internal laryngeal nerve and superior laryngeal vessels. The gap below the inferior constrictor is the recurrent laryngeal nerves and vessels, and the gap between superior and middle constrictor, oropharyngeal triangle. The oropharyngeal triangle has got a key muscle, what is called as hyoglossus muscle. So hyoglossus muscle largely closes this oropharyngeal triangle. The posterior part of this oropharyngeal triangle is for 2 structures. Stylopharyngeus muscle, and along with stylopharyngeus muscle, throughout its course is accompanied by glossopharyngeal nerve, which also supplies the stylopharyngeus muscle, because stylopharyngeus muscle is the only muscle developed from the third arch, supplied by glossopharyngeal. So the posterior part of this oropharyngeal triangle passes the stylopharyngeus and glossopharyngeal nerve. And we said, anterior part, the key structure lies in the oropharyngeal triangle, that is the hyoglossus muscle. What are the other structures which pass through the oropharyngeal triangle? So we said the key muscle is hyoglossus. Deeper to hyoglossus lies styloglossus, glossopharyngeal nerve, stylopharyngeus nerve, lingual artery, and dorsal lingual vein. Deeper to hyoglossus, styloglossus, glossopharyngeal nerve, stylopharyngeus muscle. So muscle, lingual artery, and dorsal lingual vein. In fact, lingual artery is divided by hyoglossus muscle into 3 parts. The first part proximal to hyoglossus, second part deep to hyoglossus, third part anterior to hyoglossus. Superficial to hyoglossus lies the lingual nerve, the submandibular deep part and its duct, and hypoglossal nerve. So 2 nerves sandwiching a duct. Here it was 2 muscles sandwiching a nerve in between. And of course, lingual artery is accompanied by dorsal lingual vein. The deep lingual vein does not join the lingual vein. The deep lingual vein lies in a different plane as compared to the dorsal lingual vein. The dorsal lingual vein accompanies the artery. The deep lingual vein accompanies the hypoglossal vein. Therefore, the deep lingual vein is also called as vena comitans nervi hypoglossa. Vein accompanying hypoglossal nerve, vena comitans nervi hypoglossa. Lingual artery is a single artery, but it has got 2 tributaries, dorsal lingual vein and deep lingual vein, though they are separated by the hyoglossus muscle. And repeat again, superficial to hyoglossus, 2 nerves sandwiching a duct, deep to hyoglossus, 2 muscles sandwiching a nerve. The palatine tonsil lies between the palatoglossal and palatopharyngeal arches of the lateral oropharyngeal. The lateral oropharyngeal wall from the soft palate, two muscles descend down. One goes to the tongue, the other goes to the thyroid cartilage. So that is called as palatoglossal arch and palatopharyngeal arch. In between the two, sandwiched, is a palatine tonsil. Palatoglossal arch is the oropharyngeal isthmus. So whatever is in front of palatoglossal arch is oral cavity. Whatever is behind the palatoglossal arch is pharynx. Palatoglossal arch is a oropharyngeal isthmus. Automatically it goes without saying that the palatine tonsil is actually a pharyngeal structure. In the nasal cavity, nasopharynx, we said, is the opening of eustachian tube. The opening of the eustachian tube is shown as an elevation of the lateral oropharynx called as torus tuberis. From the posterior part of the torus tuberous arises the salpingopharyngeus. So the three longitudinal muscles of the larynx, we said, one comes from outside the pharynx, passing between superior constrictor and middle constrictor, and enters the pharynx and goes and gets attached to the thyroid cartilage. So it helps in elevating the larynx. The palatoglossus going to the tongue elevates the tongue. Palatopharyngeus going to the thyroid cartilage helps in elevating the larynx. The salpingopharyngeus, the word salpinx means tube. Here it refers to the eustachian tube. So salpingopharyngeus also is a longitudinal muscle going in attached to the thyroid cartilage, helping in lifting up the larynx. So in fact, the three longitudinal muscles, stylopharyngeus, palatopharyngeus, and salpingopharyngeus, should be correctly called as stylolaryngeus, palatolaryngus, salpingolaryngeus, because they help in lifting up the larynx and not so much as shortening the pharynx. Posterior one-third of the tongue also has got lingual tonsils. In relation to the eustachian tube, there are some tonsils which are called as tubal tonsil, and there is one on the roof of the nasopharynx which is called as pharyngeal tonsil. So remember, although we said the posterior one-third of the tongue, the styloglossal arch, so even the lingual tonsils and palatine tonsils are also part of the pharynx. But when we say the word pharyngeal tonsil, it only refers to the tonsil which is lying on the roof of the nasopharynx. So let us talk about the tonsils. The collection of lymphoid tissue in the mucosa of the pharynx surrounding the openings of nasal and oral cavities. They form what is called as Waldeur's tonsillar ring as a part of body's defense mechanism. So this is where the nasal and oral pharynx are having the defense mechanism, because organisms can pass either through the nasal cavity or through the oral cavity to enter the body. The largest of these collections form distinct masses which are called tonsils. Remember, when you use the word tonsil, we are referring to the mucosa of the pharynx. Then sometimes we use the word abdominal tonsil. What is abdominal tonsil? Abdominal tonsil is another word for appendix, because appendix has got a ring of lymphoid follicle. So that's also called as abdominal tonsil. But when we refer to tonsils, it usually refers to one tonsil, the palatine tonsil. The pharyngeal tonsil, when it's enlarged, the pharyngeal tonsil means the roof of the nasopharynx is enlarged. It is called as adenoids. It lies in the midline, the roof of the nasopharynx. The palatine tonsils are on each side of oropharynx, between the palatoglossal and palatopharyngeal arches. Palatoglossal arch, junction between oral cavity and oropharynx. Behind that, and in front of palatopharynges, is a palatine tonsil. When we use the word the tonsil, it refers to palatine tonsils. Lingual tonsils are numerous lymphoid follicles of the posterior one-third of the tongue, and smaller lymphoid nodules which occur in relation to pharyngotympanic tube. The nasopharynx is called as tubal tonsil. The point to be remembered is that whatever is in the nasopharynx, the pharyngeal tonsil and the tubal tonsil, both will be lined by respiratory tract epithelium, pseudostratified ciliated columnar with goblet cells. And those which are in the oropharynx, that is the palatine tonsil and the lingual tonsil, will be covered by the oropharyngeal lining epithelium, non-keratinized stratified cells. So you have got only one slide of tonsil in histology, and that is the palatine tonsil. The lining epithelium covering its surface will be non-keratinized stratified cells. Palatine tonsils have got 5 arteries which supply tonsillar branch of facial. This is the main artery. For facial artery in the neck, it gives off a large branch. This is called tonsillar branch. Ascending pharyngeal artery, one of the branches of external carotid, supplies the pharynx and also supplies the pharyngeal tonsil, the palatine tonsil, which is lying in the oropharynx. Ascending palatine branch of facial artery, we said, the ascending palatine branch of facial artery, another branch in the neck, passes from the lateral wall of the pharynx, gives a branch to the palatine tonsil, and then goes all the way up to pass in the gap between the superior constrictor base curve. Greater and lesser palatine branches of maxillary. Maxillary has got multiple branches. One of them is greater palatine, which also gives a branch called lesser palatine artery. And one of the branches of external carotid, lingual artery, when it supplies the tongue, it also supplies the lingual tonsil and the palatine tonsil. So 5 of the arteries will supply the tongue. When tonsillectomy is performed, if the tonsils are enlarged, painful, and infected, especially in a child, if the tonsillectomy is performed, you don't try to ligate all these 5 arteries, because these arteries lie outside the pharynx, they pierce the superior constrictor and enter the pharynx. And at that time, they supply the tonsils. What you have to do is, after you remove the palatine tonsil, the superior constrictor will go into contraction and it will block all these 5 arteries. So automatically the bleeding is stopped because of the contraction of superior constrictor. In contrast, if there is a clot formed in the tonsillar bed due to clotting of any one of these 5 arteries, what will happen is superior constrictor will not be able to go into full contraction. And it's not able to go into full contraction. The clotted vessel will not bleed, but the other vessel will keep bleeding. Therefore, it is recommended that after tonsillectomy, if there are clots formed, the clots must be removed to allow the superior constrictor to go into full contraction, which will block all these 5 vessels. So one of the rare places in the body where you do not want clots to form. The other area is uterus. Again, the blood vessels in the uterus lie in the muscular layer of the uterus called as myometrium. So after if there is uterine bleeding, you must not allow the clots to form within the uterine cavity, because that will prevent the myometrium to go into full contraction. If there are clots formed in the uterus, it must be removed. Elsewhere in the body, we promote formation of clot. Palatine tonsils and uterus is where you remove clots. Here is the upper jaw and the teeth in the upper jaw. The 4 incisors in the anterior part, and there is an incisive foramen here. a triangular region which is formed by incisive foramen and four incisors are together called as premaxilla. The rest of the hard palate is from the maxilla, maxillary process. At times, even the space, depression below the midline of the nose, in the upper lip, is called as philtrum. Philtrum develops from premaxilla. The rest of the upper lip develops from the maxillary process. So if the premaxilla and the maxillary process fail to fuse in the upper lip, you get a condition which is called as cleft lip. And if there is a failure of fusion of premaxilla bone with the maxilla bone, you get a cleft palate. Cleft palate is anterior cleft palate is usually oblique. We said between the incisors canine and the incisive foramen. Cleft palate. But if there is a posterior cleft palate, it will usually be in the midline. Posterior cleft palate, because the two halves are formed by palatine process, posterior cleft palate is a midline. Sometimes you get the uvula, which is a tongue depression, tongue-like process, which is lying on the posterior border of the uvula. Sometimes the cleft palate will be so minimal that only the uvula will be split. That is called as cleft uvula. So cleft palate anteriorly oblique, cleft palate posteriorly midline, or just a cleft uvula. The soft palate continues posteriorly from the hard palate and acts as a valve that we have already said. When depressed, it helps close the oropharyngeal isthmus. When elevated, it separates the nasopharynx from the oropharynx and it blocks the nasopharyngeal isthmus. The soft palate is formed and moved by five muscles, which is covered by mucosa that is continuing the mucosal lining of the pharynx and oral and nasal cavities. So the part of the soft palate which is facing the nasal cavity, that is the upper surface, will be lined by the respiratory tract epithelium, pseudocyte ciliate and columnar sensitive goblet, whereas those on the oropharyngeal side will be same lining as oral cavity, non-keratinized cytoplasm. The soft palate has got two separate epithelium lining each surfaces. Five muscles from each side contribute to the formation of soft palate. Two of the five muscles, tensor villi palatini and levator villi palatini, descend into the palate from the base skull. Two others, palatoglossus and palatopharyngeal, descend from the palate to the tongue and pharynx. Palatoglossus to the tongue, palatopharyngeal to the pharynx. And the last muscle, the musculus uvulae, is associated with the uvula, so it helps in movement of the uvula. What is the nerve supply of all these pharyngeal and palatine muscles? All constrictors of the pharynx are supplied by cranial part of axillary through vagus, except the cricopharyngeal sphincter, which is supplied by recurrent laryngeal nerve. The part of the cricopharyngeal sphincter is supplied by recurrent laryngeal nerve. All the longitudinal muscles of the pharynx are supplied by cranial part of axillary through vagus, except stylopharyngeus supplied by glossopharyngeal nerve. All the five muscles of the palate are supplied by cranial accessory through vagus, except tensor villi palatini. Tensor villi palatini, being the nerve of the first arch, is supplied by mandibular nerve. So man should nerve to medial pterygoid. Pharynx from posterior, you are seeing the nasopharynx here. The choanea, the opening of the nasal cavity to nasopharynx, the soft palate with the uvula, the oral cavity and oropharynx, pharynx posterior wall is cut open, the laryngeal opening on either side the laryngeal opening is called as pyriform fossa or the smuggler's pouch. And finally, the applied anatomy. We already discussed, but let us repeat. The philtrum of the upper lip is developed from the premaxilla. The rest of the upper lip is from the maxillary process. Premaxilla is a part of frontonasal process. So when the frontonasal process fails to fuse with the medial nasal process, you get a condition which is called as cleft lip. Cleft lip is of the upper lip is always paramedial. Rarely there is a cleft lower lip, which will be in the midline, because cleft lower lip is formed by the fusion of two mandibular processes. If the mandibular process fails to fuse, you will get a cleft in the midline. The cleft of the upper lip is usually paramedial. It may be associated with cleft palate, in which case the premaxilla fails to fuse with the maxillary process. Cleft palate anteriorly will always be paramedial from the gap between the incisors and canine all the way up to the posterior part, which is incisive foramen. Whereas cleft posterior palate will be midline, or it can be just a small cleft in the uvula. All the rest of the palate and soft palate are formed from the maxillary process. The junction between nasopharynx and oropharynx is lined by a ridge, which is called as Passemal's ridge. If you look at the oropharynx by shining a torch to the oropharynx and asking the person to say "ah," the soft palate gets raised. You will not see the Passemal's ridge normally. So what happens is, we said one of the longitudinal muscles of the pharynx is palatopharyngeus, starting from palate going to the pharynx. Remember, in a newborn child, the laryngeal opening is in the nasopharynx. Laryngeal opening is the nasopharynx. That is why there is no common food and air passage like all of us have. Oropharynx acts as a common food and air passage. In a newborn child, such a thing does not occur. And therefore, a newborn child can breathe and swallow at the same time. We can't breathe and swallow at the same time because if the air may enter the esophagus and the food may enter the larynx. In a newborn child, such a thing does not happen. A newborn child will not choke when drinking milk, even if it is placed in a completely horizontal position. Some newborns are born with a cleft palate. Some of them, 1 in 1,000 maybe, or even slightly lesser than that. So in such a case, because of the cleft in the palate, the milk that is in the oral cavity will go into the nasal cavity. Whenever any food particle or milk enters the nasal cavity, the brain will get a sensation that some wrong passage of food has occurred. What happens in such a case is that the palatopharyngeus, which is a newborn, is horizontal because we said the larynx lies in the nasopharynx. So palate to pharynx, larynx will be horizontal. When the larynx descends into the neck, the palatopharyngeus muscle becomes vertical. but some fibers of pallidopharynges remains horizontal, which lies in the junction of nasopharynx and oropharynx. So whenever there is milk entering the nasal cavity, the brain will get a sensation that probably the nasopharyngeal isthmus is not closed. So how to close the nasopharyngeal isthmus? Raise the soft palate and also bring about contraction of the horizontal fibers of palatopharyngeal, which is still left horizontal. Majority of the fibers are vertical, some are horizontal. So the palatopharyngeal, when it goes into horizontal fibers of palatopharyngeal, when it goes to full contraction, it is seen as a ridge of the posterior pharyngeal wall, which is called as Perseverance ridge. So Perseverance ridge is a hypertrophied horizontal part of palatopharyngeal muscle lying at the nasopharyngeal isthmus, seen prominent in a child who has got cleft palate. The lower part of superior constrictor is covered by upper part of middle constrictor. The lower part of middle constrictor is covered by the upper part of inferior constrictor. Inferior constrictor, we said, has got two parts, the thyropharyngeal part and the cricopharyngeal part. The cricopharynx is a hypertrophied thick muscle, also has got dual nerve supply from the pharyngeal plexus and from the recurrent laryngeal nerve. So there are chances that the cricopharyngeal muscle does not properly relax when the thyropharynx goes into contraction. So thyropharynge's upper part is reinforced by the middle constrictor lower part. But the middle part of the inferior constrictor, thyropharynge's part, which is not overlapping the middle constrictor, is a weakness in the pharyngeal wall. So when the inferior constrictor fails to relax properly, when the thyropharynx goes into contraction, the deficiency, the weakness of the thyropharyngeal part of its inferior constrictor balloons out, forms a diverticulum, which was described by scientists called Killian. It's called Killian's dehiscence. The fossa of Rosenmuller is a space which is lying behind the torus tubarius. Torus tubarius, remember, opening of eustachian tube into the nasopharynx. The space behind that is called as fossa of Rosenmuller. Fossa of Rosenmuller is a thin part of the nasopharynx. In earlier times, before the advent of antibiotics, when the eustachian tube used to be blocked, it causes a severe pain in the ear because the air from the middle ear gets absorbed and the tympanic membrane gets pulled inwards because to prevent the vacuum formation. So severe pain in the ear. So what used to be done is that a catheter used to be passed through the eustachian tube to open it up to allow air to equalize the pressure between external air and middle ear. Of course, after the advent of antibiotics, you don't require to catheterize. In those catheterization, sometimes if the tube, instead of passing through the eustachian tube, passes behind the eustachian tube, fossa of Rosenmuller by mistake. The fossa of Rosenmuller is a very thin muscle which can easily perforate, and immediately lateral to that is internal carotid artery. You can imagine if a catheter forces itself from fossa of Rosenmuller and break the internal carotid artery, torrential bleed can lead to death. We already said that lateral to the opening of the pharynx is called the smuggler's pouch. It is in this region that smugglers used to smuggle diamonds. That part of the pharynx is somewhat voluntary. Not completely voluntary, but partly voluntary. With practice, it can become a little voluntary. Smugglers used to smuggle the diamonds passing into the smuggler's. You can't take gold or platinum because that will be detected by metal detector. But diamond being an isotope of carbon cannot be detected. And if you have asked the person to open the mouth, you can't see what is lying in the pyriform fossa, also called smuggler's pouch. And then, of course, after the customs is cleared, you can take out because the semi-voluntary nature of that person is there with practice. You can bring out the diamond out of the oropharynx, laryngopharynx. Before you start smuggling diamonds there, make sure you practice with ice cubes, because in case a diamond slips and goes into the esophagus, then it will cause a straight gastrocolic fistula from the stomach. The diamond will tear open the gastric wall and enter the transverse colon. Shortcut for diamond to reach transverse colon. Of course, perforation of the stomach and or transverse colon will cause peritonitis and death within 4 hours. So don't start smuggling diamonds in the smuggler's pouch. Not a very safe idea. Another point about the smuggler's pouch is that it is here that the internal laryngeal nerve opens. Internal laryngeal nerve opens here, and if there is a fish thorn, the fish bones, fish thorn, if it gets stuck in the smuggler's pouch and you try to badly remove it, your chances are that the internal laryngeal nerve will get damaged, which will cause anesthesia of the supraglottic portion of the larynx and the valleculae and pyriform fossa region of the pharynx. So the absence of that reflex will fail to cause the laryngeal opening to close when the food is being passed through. The third important part of the smuggler's pouch is that food normally does not pass through the pouch, it passes over the pouch. So a small tumor or a cancer in the smuggler's pouch is not detected early, it is usually detected quite late. And of course, tonsillar clots we already discussed. Because the blood vessels supplying the tonsils pass piercing the superior constrictor, you do not want the clots to form in the tonsillar bed. Whatever clots are formed, you remove them so that the superior constrictor can go into full contraction, which will cause the bleeding to stop. With that, we come to the end of the discussion today. Do you have any questions? If not, you can enter your number in the chat box and proceed to the resection hall for your next session.
Sir,